for the funding that we have in 15 is the link. I haven't consulted with staff to know if we will just pursue expansion of that, or if we'll look for an organization that has a different kind of cultural knowledge or connection to the community.
Hey, Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much. I just want to understand a little bit how closely this is integrated into our youth violence prevention plan. Mm-hmm. And is this, do we identify youth who are at risk for violence and are incorporated into this? Because I think there might be some confusion about that. So could you just clarify that for me?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Gordon. Yes, this is a program that is targeted to serving families who have a young person who has been identified as having risk for violence. It is part of the Youth Violence Prevention Blueprint Plan and is also consistent with My Brother's Keeper.
So I just wanted to kind of highlight that because I think there's a perception somehow that this is a new thing that got created and it's a one-off idea, whereas something actually it's something we've been working towards now since 2008 as kind of identifying priorities. We spent a long time on the Youth Violence Prevention Executive Committee trying to identify kids at risk, because a lot of times what we would hear is after somebody was a victim of violence, everybody would say, well, we knew that it was coming, we knew that was going to happen. And so this is an effort that we've carefully worked towards to help us figure out how can we identify those kids who are at risk and how can we help. And while it might also look like this is a Minneapolis solo project, the fact that we are investing in this one strategy of our youth violence prevention plan is helping show all the other partners who are at the table that they can then keep investing in the parts of the plan that they're implementing, the schools, the counties, the parks, the foundations. So it's part of this bigger plan that's actually leveraging a great deal, I believe, of community investment, of foundations, of other interests, and getting us at the table to participate in it. Not that we can't leverage more funds for this if it actually works better, because I think we're seeing that it is, but when we are, and we're still working better, I think, at figuring out how we're going to identify at-risk use and what is the measurement. So at some point we can maybe walk in and say, we think there are 800 youth who might actually qualify for these services and we'd like to offer them. This is what it'll cost, and we could fundraise for that. But I just wanted to highlight that in the discussion and put it in the perspective of, I think, longer term planning and work that's been going on in the city for a long time.
Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Please pardon my ignorance if being here too long is problematic, but in the old days, we used to use the Public Health Advisory Committee to allocate CDBG money for social service organizations in order to have all of our grant making for social services in one place. So are we now, these are additions to all of those grants, or that process is completely over and these are enhancements as a result of the elimination of that process?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Goodman, yes, in fact, the CDBG funding was one of those sources of funds for some of the earlier versions of this work. But CDBG funding from the federal government has decreased to the extent that there are no longer any grants made with CDBG funds to the community. So,
Mr. Chair, perhaps what we need to do is determine how much money we're willing to allocate to becoming a grant maker. This was always the place where the city council fought in the past. And it was also a place where a lot of votes were traded in the past. Well, 15,000 for my bike thing. That was a big thing in the old days, Lisa. I know you don't believe that, but, and then 25,000 for this, Nokomis Healthy Seniors, and 25,000 for this and that. And everyone got a little bit of what they wanted, but it was managed and corralled within a very limited amount of money. And it seems now that it's not managed and corralled within a limited amount of money. It's just all over the place. It's probably not only in the health department's budget. I'm going to guess CPED. When I took a look at some of the CPED add-ons, that's where there was a healthy senior grant for $25,000. So it seems like we've eliminated the idea of making choices, and we've decided to put it back into all of the departments so no one really knows what role we're playing. I personally think our role in funding nonprofit programs should be extremely limited to the priorities the Public Health Advisory Committee had put forward in the past, including youth violence and seniors. And then we have to have a limited amount of money going to those things, and it should be competing, and it should be competitive with projects against each other. It seems like we're now just like hiding these things all over in the different budgets. Every department head's going to come and talk about the ones that they want. I could pull up the ones in at CPED because I happen to have it in front of me when I asked, but there's a whole number of these kinds of nonprofit things thrown in. Green Zones, Nokomis East Side Senior Center, the Opportunity Hub at Cedar Riverside. Some of them are very large contributions, I might add, making these look like peanuts. So perhaps the chair might want to consider asking for a consolidation of all of these programs throughout the budgets, and we should make a determination as to where we're going to draw the line, because there's always going to be another level of government that's going to screw us and give us less money. And all of these nonprofits are going to be coming to us kind of at the bottom of the funding totem pole and say, well, the feds didn't do this and the state didn't do that. Now we're going to hear about UCare and the loss of their contract. And now all of a sudden, what's going to happen? Well, what's going to happen is we're going to shut down the senior center unless someone else steps up to fund it. I don't think we should be funding $1,250 chairs there when we don't know exactly what's going to be happening with the senior center. That's going to be a tough decision to make, but we're not the funder of last resort. Our job is basic city services as it pertains to our basic goals. I would argue youth violence is part of that picture, by the way, so I don't want to not, and seniors I think are too, actually. But we're not in the business of funding senior centers, and we shouldn't be in the business of funding senior centers. And it gets to Councilmember Glidden's point about how does something go on for a long period of time, and then we have a hard time pushing back from it. So I don't think this is Gretchen's, issue only. It's in all sorts of budgets all throughout the system.
That's true. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is such an interesting discussion. It's really raising a lot of sort of bigger philosophical questions about our budget. And I just wanted to add that, I think on some of these, particularly the health prevention area, it's one of these things where I think we also need to try to weigh this investment versus the consequences of not investing in prevention. So, if we don't interact in air quality or violence prevention or healthy environments for children, what are the long-term consequences and budgetary implications of that? And we know in health, there are significant costs related to unhealthy behaviors in childhood that follow people for a very long time. And in the youth violence prevention that Councilmember Gordon and others have spent so much time working on, looking holistically at that program area and understanding the trade-offs in terms of future costs of law enforcement and reacting to, all of the consequences of having a record of violent crime during your youth. So all of those things I think have to be taken into account. And I think they're a lot harder to measure, but I do think that we challenge the health department in particular to be very evidence-based and to try to make those cases. So I would be interested as we weigh some of these particular enhancements that are focused on prevention as much as we can to try to understand the longer-term budgetary consequences of not taking action.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll try and prepare something that uses that lens, looking at the overall recommendations I'm sharing with you today. Should I finish with my last slide and then?
Yes,
Okay.
if you could,
Yep.
You ran out of that bonus time that you started with.
Okay, well,
So
appreciate
in an effort
that.
to keep it on, we'll try to keep it as brief as you can.
Okay, yes, and
You were asking for bonus points early.
yeah.
I knew this would happen.
Councilmember Goodwin has already given us a preview of this last slide. So we had requested from through the CARS process minimal funding, $12,500 for new furniture for the Skyway Senior Center. They get like 18,000 visits a year. And they've been using residential grade furniture and it's just worn out. And so if we're going to have a center that has that kind of traffic, we need to put some different furniture in it. One issue that was not on the table during the budget process, we did not brief the mayor on it. We didn't know about it. Is the status of UCare itself. So Skyway Senior Center is not supported with city dollars generally. It's supported primarily by UCare with $176,000. We have diversified the funding by adding one partner, a minor partner, Augustana, at $10,000. So you may have followed in the news that UCare, the Department of Human Services at the state, has decided that UCare is not going to be a provider for public programs. They will be focused solely on their senior programs. It's still in the courts. There's still some ambiguity to it. But the paper makes it seem like they will lay off conceivably half of their employees. So I would think that we have some vulnerability in terms of their support for the Skyway Senior Center. We have a meeting set up with them on October 5th. We also have a meeting set up with the Friends of the Skyway Senior Center on that same day. So I just wanted to put it on your radar, and there will be more to come.
Thank you very much for that note. Does that conclude your
Does.
presentation?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman?
Sorry, Mr. Chair. I mean, I can definitely see the headline in tomorrow's paper, and I would run right to it if I were Aaron. I would simply say budget request for 10 chairs at $1,250 each for a senior center that might not have any funding come the end of the year. I would warn us that we probably shouldn't be buying furniture for a senior center that might not be funded at the end of the year. I have been on the board of the Friends. I've been involved in the organization for many, many, many years. I think it's super valuable, but our philosophy has been we don't fund social service organizations' operating expenses over time, and there is a risk. Medica, I think, was once the senior center sponsor. I don't think we should be buying any new chairs if we don't know if the center is going to be operating after December. And I really think just the story and the reality that it's going to be $1,250 per chair is not one that the health commissioner is going to want out there as the result of this budget, which has so much good stuff in it with regard to environmental health and safety, youth violence prevention, and all the other things that the commissioner has discussed. So I think we need to take a step back from buying chairs and I appreciate the effort to keep the senior center open. I hope it will happen, but if it comes back to us to fund $160,000 operating, it's not going to happen. So I think we should be clear about that.
Thank you, Councilmember. Good. Well, thank you very much for your presentation.
Yeah.
Obviously, a lot to work on, and as Councilmember Goodman points out, there's so many great things in this budget. I hope we can resolve a lot of these funding issues. I know that the chairs, for example, is part of a CARS request going forward, and so we'll see how that plays out through the budget process. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to, our next budget hearing is going to be with the City Attorney's Office. So we're going to invite our City Attorney, Susan Siegel, and various staff members who are in the hall to join us and allow for some transition moments.
Good morning and thank you. As the PowerPoint's coming up, just give you a little general background reminder. Our office is split into two divisions, the criminal division and the civil division. The criminal division is funded through the general fund, and our civil division work is funded through the self-insurance fund. We have, each division has two programs. So under the criminal division, we've got our community attorney program where we have one of our prosecutors housed in each of the 5 precincts, along with 3 paralegals that are divided among the 5 police precincts. Their function, as I know many of you work with them closely, is not only to serve as a resource for the police department, but to work with community groups, neighborhood businesses on issues of public safety, and then our criminal prosecutions group. And then in the civil division, we have the civil litigation group, program area, and client services. So client services does everything but litigation, basically. It does all the rest of the legal work for the city of Minneapolis. I'm going to flip to measures. I mean, within our community attorney program, we have the Downtown 100 and Focus 18 to 24 program, as well as our citywide 200 program where we have probation officers. The goal of all of this is to try to keep people kind of repeat chronic lower level offenders out of the workhouse and out on supervised release. The Downtown 100 continues to be a very successful program, as well as the 18 to 24 program with substantial reductions in new offenses by chronic offenders. And then the most important part to us, and the reason I think why it's so successful, is because it really tries to help these individuals with what their underlying issues are. So this slide just shows referrals for housing, because a large percentage of our downtown people are in fact homeless, chemical dependency, and mental health services. In the criminal division, the prosecution program continues to handle a very heavy caseload. They have more cases per prosecutor than any other prosecution office in the state of Minnesota. And in 2014 handled almost close to 18,000 cases. While we have a number of measures for our prosecution work, one thing that we particularly focus on is our domestic violence work. There we've been able to maintain close to a 70% conviction rate through a lot of hard work and effort. And then through the most recent Federal Violence Against Women Act grant that we received, it allowed us to add some additional investigative and other resources into our what are called gone on arrival cases, where the alleged perpetrator is gone when the police respond to a 911 call. And those are very dangerous cases for the victims in those situations, because there's knowledge that 911 has been called and the person, has not been taken into custody. And so we're really pleased that we've been able, we've got a 400% increase in the number of gone on arrival cases charged, and also a very high conviction rate for those cases. So we're pleased with that work. We've also been able to significantly reduce the amount of time it takes from prosecutors reviewing the case initially until when it's charged, and then to case resolution, another important factor in victim safety. Something else that we stress among our various measures, again, is participating in the problem-solving courts. Again, trying to find more effective solutions by dealing with the underlying issues, whether it's mental illness, chemical dependency, veterans court, the Holmes court, and then the specialized court calendar, Gaining Independence for Females in Transition. That's a treatment court for prostituted women. Then I'm not going to go into each measure here, but next one is through a lot of work and effort in our criminal division. We've not only increased the number of cases we take to trial, but our conviction rate has gone up substantially. And in 2014, it was 74%. When I started, it was right around 50% for the cases we actually try. The mayor's recommended enhancements for our criminal division are largely one-time funding. The most significant one is $248,000 for what we proposed as a 2-year pilot, and this would be funding for year 1 to establish a charging team to allow us to bring on 2 additional prosecutors, with the thought that we would take over charging for misdemeanor cases for individuals booked at the jail, and for court-required misdemeanor citations. This relates back to one of the recommendations a while back from a Council on Crime and Justice review of lower-level crimes, and those cases now are all charged. The only thing we're responsible for charging as prosecutors that we do charge are gross misdemeanor cases, which are less probably than 20% of our overall caseload. And so this would give our prosecutors a chance to look at these cases to not only make sure that there's probable cause, that they meet the elements of the crime, but that we've got enough evidence to be able to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. And we do early on dismiss a certain proportion of cases now because it doesn't, it doesn't mean it's not a case that we believe we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. This would avoid people from getting that charge on their record just to have it dismissed and to avoid that collateral consequence, as well as a second function of the team would be to provide individualized feedback to the police officers on any deficiencies in the report or any other concerns that we identify. And so maybe with this 2-year pilot, it can go out of business because we will have reinforced what we need in order to prosecute these kinds of cases. But we will continue to assess that throughout.
Ms. Siegel, just a quick question for myself, and Council Vice President has a question as well. So this enhancement for 2 additional staff, is this for this charging team pilot, and it's on a one-time?
Yes, it is
funding?
one time, but we proposed it as a 2-year pilot because I don't know that we'll be able to get enough bang for the buck just in 1 year. And it'll also take us, we're starting to work on this now, so that we're prepared if the council approves this additional funding. There are a lot of just practical issues to work out, of figuring out how this would work. Because an underlying premise we've got here is we do not want people to spend a longer time in jail than they do presently under the current system. And so there's real timing issues. How quickly can the police get their police reports in? I think they're allowed 24 hours now under police current rules. There's some technology issues. So we've got a lot of figuring to do in order to make this fully workable.
Thank you. Council Vice President.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to speak on this a little bit. I heard about this as a proposal coming forward from the City Attorney's Office, and I'm very interested in it. I think it's something that has the potential to produce some really substantial just structural change in the way that the system, all the players in the system interact and look at is there sufficient evidence and kind of all those checks and balances that we want to be part of the system and still allow the system to work without delays and other things. So I was curious, did you have a timeline in mind, and maybe that's too hard right now, for how long it might take to work through some of these procedural issues or operational issues that you've identified? And my other question was what thoughts you had given to evaluation mechanisms for the pilot to ensure that we kind of have a good way to collect and document and then communicate the results of the pilot.
Mr. Chair and Council Vice President Glidden, those are very good questions. We are starting, I've talked to, where is she? Mary Ellen Hang is here, Michelle Jacobson, Tim Richards, and Chris Dixon, who's my other supervisor. But I'm starting to work with people now on trying to figure this out. Just met with Deputy Chief Arredondo yesterday to talk about a variety of things. We started on this as well. My hope would be to try to have this up and operating quickly in 2016. If there are some technology problems that we, or timing issues that we can't overcome for a while, I think what we would do is use this staff to at least help support expungement, so that if there was a charge that we couldn't, decided for whatever reason we weren't going to proceed on until we can get this up and moving, that we will help expunge those records, so people do not have a charge and a dismissal if it's a case that currently we're dismissing at the arraignment level for insufficient evidence or other things. So I'm hopeful that we can figure this out in a matter of of a few months and get it up and running in the first quarter of 2016.
And I did want to hear a little bit on your thoughts on your evaluation mechanisms, but I guess I'll just kind of throw out one more thing related to that. Is I forget the exact name of it, but this initiative that's more connected with the police department and the federal government resources and the academic resources that are there to kind of assist the police department. I know one of the prongs that they're looking at are procedural justice issues. And I was just curious if perhaps in this evaluation end of things, or maybe even in the looking at how operationally could this work, are those resources that we can tap for assistance to this proposed pilot program.
Chair Quincy
And I
and
apologize, I can't remember
Council
the name
Vice
of
President
this.
Glidden, no, that would be my intent, because we are dealing with kind of the national expert researchers in this whole area, would be for this to be part of that initiative, and to get some guidance on we can compare kind of the before and after, and we probably have the capability to do that ourselves. We also probably would like to do some qualitative analysis here, as well as making sure, how much time are people spending in jail? Are we increasing it? Are we decreasing it? Are we decreasing the types and numbers of people who are actually being booked in jail, as a consequence of all this? So thank you for that suggestion. And that's exactly, our intent is to work closely with that initiative. And since, a number of the types of cases that we prosecute are right at the crossroads of racial disparities issues in the criminal justice system, that certainly, is a logical, complementary approach. All right. And then there are several small, now that we're talking about research, one-time funding to help us develop policy positions and to improve on what we're already doing. The first one is for driving-related offenses, and it's about 30% of our caseload are driving-related offenses: driving after suspension, driving after revocation, no insurance, no proof of insurance, those kinds of things. And for people with limited financial resources, it becomes a huge spider's web net. Now, $50 speeding ticket, you add in a $75 court surcharge, $3 for the Hennepin County Law Library fee. So all of a sudden you've got $128 to pay off in order to get those waived, because you don't have the income to do that. Requires at least 3 trips, probably a couple hours each, to the government center to go stand in line at the traffic office to go in front of a referee who can waive the fine, and then you actually have to go in front of a judge. So that's a 3rd trip to see if the judge will suspend the court surcharge. If you don't do all that, and you pick up more, eventually, your driver's license will be suspended. Then you start picking up driving after suspension tickets, and the web thickens. We do have, there's this pilot program that actually Ramsey County Attorney John Choi got legislation to support a few years back when he was the St. Paul City Attorney, that allows people with suspended licenses to get their licenses reinstated and to pay off fines over time. But that still is a pilot program, and people have to be able to pay off all their fines over an 18-month period of time. The average amount of fines that people owe that are referred to that program is about $2,500. We've had some cases where people have owed as much as $10,000 or more. Huge burden. So we're working with IGR and with Chair Glidden of that committee for a legislative initiative to make that program permanent and statewide. But there also just needs to be some policy analysis to figure this out. These are crimes that do not involve violence, and yet so many people are, poor people, just because you have lower financial resources, and disproportionately it impacts people of color. Next is we have developed a diversion program for certain kinds of obstruction of legal process cases, ones that do not involve use of force, where a facilitator, and we're working with Restorative Justice Community Action now to provide the facilitators for people who want to participate in this program instead of going through traditional prosecution. They'll sit down and meet with a representative of the police department in a facilitated discussion, hopefully to try to improve understanding of why the person, did not follow whatever the officer wanted.